So I am excited about this topic, Kirk.
I am too. You know I am.
I know you are. There are two things in the world that get you smiling: PowerShell and GitHub. I just like otherwise you're just robotic.
There's even a bit of both in this particular talk.
There is a bit of both in there. So yeah. So I mean, I don't know how you're containing yourself right now. I mean, you can't see him, but his hands are doing this. So we're talking about how we have integrated GitHub with our platform. And the different various ways we're doing it. Now, this to me is important from a couple of standpoints. Number one is our IDL studio, which Brian, who's now that way. I don't know how they're seeing it. It's one of those.
Yeah, I think
that way. Next door. You know, if you're watching and looking at what he's doing, number one, while you're watching him, you should be watching us. But if you look at the recordings of what he's doing, you'll learn that our lab editor, IDL Studio, it's not the best place to go write a lab. Like, you're not going to open it and write a lab end to end. It's more of a kind of data entry. So you can do it in Word. You can open Word and you can write a lab end to end, and we can import the Word document provided you have followed a very strict template in Word. The challenge with Word is, you can bold and italicize and change, and it's very easy to break it so the import doesn't work because Word is just very flexible. So we then introduced this notion of XML. And so if you want to, you can sit and type a document in XML. Why on earth would you do that? But you could. And we could actually do things where we could say, take a Word document, and if you didn't break the formatting, export it to, I think it's Office XML or Open XML. What was it called? No, Office XML.
Office XML.
Office XML, yeah. And then transform that into our sort of basic XML, and import that, and it, all these methods over time of authoring a lab document and then getting it on the platform, none of them are wonderful. They're not things I stand up and go, that's a cool feature. It's, the things we can do, but they're not the best. So then we found Kirk, and Kirk said, you should be doing it in Markdown on GitHub, and I went, you're crazy, go away. But he sold me. And so now what we do is we give you the ability to take a lab document that you've put in our platform, and you can actually export it to Markdown. You can store the Markdown on a GitHub repository, and then you can have your lab automatically update itself every time you modify that GitHub document. And with that, I mean, opens a world of possibilities because you can now have version control. You can now have multiple authors working on the document who are not actually part of the, you don't have accounts within LOD. So those are some of the things we're going to talk about in here, show you how to do it, show you how it works, and all the different scenarios. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Do you have the slide deck or do I?
I have the slide deck.
All right, so let's take a look at the slide deck on Kirk's screen real quick and get going from there. So
there we go.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So that was bang on. Great introduction. Thank you. And so, yeah, I'm a big fan of GitHub. I'm a big fan of being able to do things. Well, I'm a big fan of efficiency, really. When it comes down to it, IDL Studio works. You can go in there and you can create lab environments, but there are a lot of places where working through that user interface can be a bit cumbersome. And so I started thinking, well, how could this be reinvented? And I really like GitHub, and I saw Markdown and kind of thought it'd be interesting to see how these things jive together. So that's what I want to talk about in this session. So where this came from is a lot of these ideas that I'm going to present here. So have you ever wished, when you're thinking about lab creation, if you work with lab creation and content creation inside of Lab on Demand, have you ever wished you could edit your lab content offline?
On an airplane.
Exactly. That's the thing, right? I travel a fair amount for conferences, and with everything cloud, there's more and more limitations unless I'm using Wi-Fi over the plane's network now.
Pardon me while I chuckle at that, though.
Exactly. There's more and more, or there's less opportunities sometimes to work on a plane other than working on document editing. And so, yeah, I wish I could create lab content online because it would be very convenient.
I have actually launched a lab on an airplane before.
Oh.
It does work.
Okay.
Patience. Be patient, but it does actually work. Don't call our support and say, yeah, I'm on a Southwest flight over Kansas and the lab's really slow, because we're just going to laugh at you and say, really, you don't say. But I have actually done it. I've done it tethered to a phone, too, with 1,200 milliseconds of latency.
Nice. I haven't tried those things. So, but I have tried.
You don't live on the edge like I do.
I have wanted to create lab content offline, and so that's one of the drivers here. Writing content more like a lab manual, because if you are used to the yeah, the user interface inside of Lab on Demand, where you can click on manual at the top of your lab when you're looking at it, and you can see what that looks like. Being able to edit in that format would be very convenient, and that's one of the draws towards using Word for some people. Markdown kind of gives you that as well, and this plug into the GitHub integration. Easily collaborate on lab content. So if you want multiple authors creating content, the Lab on Demand UI hasn't had that.
It's a single user UI, right? It's the idea here is, the guy that's building the lab VMs is also the guy that's writing the documents, is also the guy that's editing the documents, is also the guy that's doing the testing and QA.
Yes.
But the reality is that's not the case. And so we have these workflows that go around where, someone will send us a VM and a Word document, and we'll take that Word document and we'll convert it to XML. We'll import it as IDL content, and then we'll publish the lab, and then someone will say, well, I need to do a review. Can you send me a Word version? So we'll export it as HTML, convert it to Word, email them the Word doc, say, turn on track changes, please, and then repeat the process over and over again, and it's incredibly inefficient. And so this, introduces the notion that you can have someone completely outside of the LOD environment have access to the text, and now these roles like reviewer, editor, updater, troubleshooter, can all be implemented in a much easier manner.
Absolutely. Also, being able to revert changes. So if you make changes over time and you wish you could go back to something you had done previously, GitHub allows you to do that. Working on content from any device. So especially in a plane, my laptop that's here in front of me is a little bit too big to fit into the coach seats where I usually sit, so I much prefer a smaller device, and I can work on content from any device. I can work on it from my phone.
Do you normally carry that laptop in your right hand or your left hand?
On my shoulder.
On your shoulder? I was wondering why that arm seemed just bulkier than the other one. 'Cause
That's right. It's a beefy laptop.
That's a personal mainframe.
But I have this cute little Bluetooth keyboard that works with my phone, and I have a markdown editor on my phone, and so I can actually write content with a very, very, very small amount of space right in front of me in a plane. And yes, that, I know, makes you chuckle. Also, allowing students to propose improvements or fixes to lab content. If you're consuming content and you see something that's a simple change, it'd be great if you could just say, well, this is wrong, or just make that change. And so that's an opportunity.
So it is too early to ask that question. We will get to it. Does the GitHub solution allow automatic use of type text? Do you know the answer offhand? Do we have type text support built into? I don't know that we have that in there yet.
Oh, it does, yes.
For the actions?
Yeah, it's there.
Okay, so the answer to that question is a definitive yes.
Yep.
What do I know?
Yeah, and you'll see how that stuff is set up. Also, being able to make broad content changes across your content in one or more labs. So even just changing a word, changing the phrasing, doing search replace, you can do that across one file. You can do that across many files. So if you have a lot of changes to make.
There's a reason why GitHub is kind of the place where developers go to store code and collaborate on code. Because all these features that developers use to build, normal software code are valid for lab steps. The global search and replace, the templates, the sharing, the check-in, check-out, the merges, the branches, the change control, all these things, they're completely valid to the notion of authoring a document, which is what building a lab manual is.
And then one more? Yeah, last one. Using your lab content to generate other materials. And that one's talked specifically to Markdown, the format, and the things you can do with Markdown that are quite interesting and compelling as well. So if you said yes to any of those, then you're going to be interested in this Lab on Demand GitHub integration. And so just going to go back a bit to talk about why GitHub. And Corey already spoke to a bunch of these different things. I mean, GitHub is a cloud-based version control repository that has been traditionally used just for programming projects. And it's been around for many years for coders, but now there are more and more companies looking at it for documentation purposes. Microsoft, MSDN docs, and TechNet docs are now authored in GitHub, and then they have tooling that then converts that into what you see online. And that tooling and that process change is really cool, because if I see an issue, I can go and make that change to that issue, propose a change, I should say. I can't change it directly, but I can say, I think this is wrong and it should be like this instead. They can approve that change, and the change goes online very, very quickly. And so that kind of cycle works very well for lab content also. So all of these notions that developers have had for a long time translate very well to content as well. Version control, open or closed source, because GitHub You can have a free GitHub account for open public repositories that anybody can see. You can have a paid GitHub account for private closed repositories. So if you want to manage your content internally, you can do that. There's support for that. Both of those are available on GitHub today. Multiple contributors. You can have as many contributors as you want inside of a GitHub repository. Support for offline editing on any device I mentioned. Pull requests. That's a weird term. Pull requests.
I've never really understood that notion of a pull and a push in GitHub. So clarify that.
Sure. I come up with an idea for something that should be changed. So maybe it's your documentation, and I see something that could be worded better. So I make that change locally, and then I send you a request to pull that change into the repository.
Okay, so pull request is you trying to push your changes in.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense.
Yes, I know. That expression is exactly how there's some wording in the GitHub management that doesn't quite jive with what you think it would be, but that's essentially what a pull request is. You're requesting that the owner of the repository that you want updated pull your changes in. And push, to answer you talked about push. Push is when you push changes into a repository that
it would make a whole lot more sense if they said request a pull as opposed to a pull request.
Yes.
Get on that, would you?
Yes, I will. Maybe there's a repository where I can send a pull request in for that change.
I quit. I'm leaving. Goodbye. Can't handle this anymore.
Markdown. Markdown is the document format that we are using for content for our integration, and Markdown is very well supported in GitHub, so that was a big draw. And then, of course, integration and automation with GitHub, because GitHub has a REST API, and so you can do things like what Microsoft has done with MSDN tooling. You can do things like what we've done with integration with GitHub and plugging into Lab on Demand. So all these things were very compelling reasons for why I'm looking at this. Now, talked about Markdown a little bit, so just going into a bit more detail. Markdown, it's a very lightweight text document format. I mean,
this is the language you're going to write the lab in.
Correct.
Right? And it's really just a text file. So if you were to look at XML, and you got some examples, Markdown, you got to show us, right? So you look at like XML, or if you're HTML, you write the tag H1 and it produces bold. Well, Markdown is similar to that in a way where you can, if you have a piece of text like, exercise 1, you can put a symbol in front of it that says this is a heading.
Yes.
And so when that markdown is brought down, those symbols can be used to interpret the meaning of the words and then turn it into titles, steps, bullets, etc.
Correct. But it does away with things that you see in XML. Like in XML, you see open and closing tags. In HTML, you've got open and close tags. Markdown, you don't open and close stuff, but you just mark it up.
It's a much simpler structure.
Absolutely. So it's a lot easier to read and manage yourself. It's also WYSIWYG, so what you see is what you get. Not in the notion that you're actually editing the content in Word, where you see the formatting in line with your editing. More in the notion that Markdown editors have a split view. And on the left-hand side, you have your content that looks like text. And on the right-hand side, you see what it looks like when it's rendered as HTML. So it gives you that visual cue to see that what you're doing is the right thing to do. It's got a great API support, so there's some open source libraries out there for Markdown. It's easy to learn, and it renders really nicely in GitHub. So let's get into showing some demos of what this is all about how you can manage your content in GitHub and what that means. Just checking for questions, and none right now. Okay. So what I have right here is, and by the way, I should qualify this feature. This is brand new. I mean, this is something that we've been working on for a little while, but we are just releasing right now. It is, you won't be able to see some of the things I'm showing you inside of Lab on Demand this minute. We are just finalizing some documentation and doing some last steps, and then you will see very soon this feature become available to you working with Lab on Demand. Very, very soon. Just not quite there yet. Just got a couple more hits on the top of the nail to get that done. But at any rate, so I'm working in our test environment where this is currently enabled. And I've got this lab, and this lab is, I want to show a couple things about it. One, since it's about content, oh wait, what are we looking at there?
Oh no, you're seeing Robert's old screen. Just unplug and plug in and plug in.
Okay.
Hey guys, just to make sure we get Kirk's screen up here. Demo.
Do that again. Okay, that's my laptop. And, oh, is it because I'm in this mode? Oh, hold on.
There we go. Just took it a second to pick
Yep. Now if I go back to here, good. There we go. Now we can see it. So this is a lab I've created, and I want to show you a few quick things about it. One is that it has no virtual machines, no networks, because this presentation is about content, not about the actual infrastructure inside of my lab.
So you're just doing instructions, right? You're surrounding this by instructions. You're not dealing with VMs. Okay.
That's right. So just imagine with this content that goes, this interesting lab that's got a lot of neat stuff inside of it. And right now, I've got this set up with instructions that I've added, already got exercises and tasks, and it's inside of, created inside of IDL Studio, for example. So if I look at the lab manual for this, you can see it's a lab that's about GIA, and it's got exercises and tasks. Thank you. And this is the rendering of those inside of a lab format. So I mean, there's quite a lot of them here. There's 5 exercises and dozens of tasks. And that includes knowledge sections. It includes some alerts, some commands that I want executed. Some type text is in here. And so that's just to show you that it already has a lot of content in here. Now, if I go and if I wanted to go and edit that content by the traditional means, I would have to click on Checkout, like you would have seen in Brian's demos, and then open up an IDL Studio, and then I could work with that content. But let's say you're a customer who has a lab, and you like what you've heard about this GitHub stuff, and you want to start taking advantage of that. So
you're starting with an existing lab already in the platform, basically?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll talk about both. Like I'll talk about net new, creating a new lab, and working with content in GitHub. But for the first example, I'm talking about, let's say you've got an existing lab in the platform with content, and you want to manage that content inside of GitHub. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to click on Export, and you're going to export your IDL content. Now, when I hit OK on this, it's going to create a zip file on my local system. Now, let me open that up. So this zip file, I wonder if I can, I don't know if I got, what's the zoom shortcut in Windows 10?
I don't know.
I can't think of it right now. At any rate, this...
we can just squint. It's okay.
Okay. So the zip file that it pulls out is very straightforward. It contains, in this particular case, this lab didn't have any videos that were stored in Lab on Demand, so there's no videos folder. It did have screenshots, so there is a screens folder with all the screenshots that were in my lab exported inside of a zip file. And then there's this content.md file. And so if I open that content file, on my system, that's going to open up in Visual Studio Code. Don't be intimidated by the words Visual Studio. This is just a markdown editor.
It's a text editor. Can you
yes,
zoom this in?
Here I can zoom, yes.
I'll zoom that in.
There.
So what we're looking at here, so is this markdown?
This is markdown.
Okay.
So let me just go up to the top here.
So let's walk me through markdown a little bit here.
Right. So in a lab, your content consists of, you have your lab exercises, and you have tasks. You have various properties that you set on those exercises and tasks. And Markdown contains a representation of those. So right here, actually, it works better if I show you both things at the same time. So let me just show you the rendered format, because you're used to seeing the content in, I just updated this, and don't tell me it's going to, hang on a second. It might just be taking a second to render the content on the right-hand side.
Did you break it, Kirk?
Well, I didn't break it if it broke. If it broke, it's because of the Visual Studio update. I'm going to just quickly switch to another editor for Markdown. So I've got a couple different editors in my environment, and I can do zoom here as well. Now let me just open up that file over here instead.
So which one is this you're using?
Right now this is Sublime.
Sublime, okay.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of different editors, and I'll show you where I've got references to a bunch of editors as well. I'm just going to extract my contents of this into a folder so I can get at it from Sublime. So extract all, that's fine. And now I will go to Downloads and GitHub. Oops, wrong folder. Okay, and view. problem with Sublime is I can't think of what the previous shortcut is. I would have to Google that. Anyway, I'm going to stick in Sublime here for a minute because it's quite clear to see what's going on. So Markdown, you know how in HTML you've got H1, H2 up to H6, right? And those are just within angle brackets. Markdown has 1 hash, 2 hash, up to 6 hashes to define your heading. So this is a H1 heading that defines the name of an exercise. So an H1 is an exercise heading. Then there are a few properties for that exercise. So in this case, it sets it uses an introductory video. So when you launch this lab, a video pops up. And there's no completion property, so it's just empty right now. The exercise also contains an introductory message, which is defined as an H2, heading 2, and a completion message, which is again as an H2. So these, if you look at those, let me flip back to my lab for a second, and I'm going to check it out, and I want to show you the IDL Studio. Because I just want to show you how this maps up between the two, right? Okay. So let me go next on this to close out. That's properties on, there's my video. So that video that I showed you the link for is what comes up from exercise properties. So here you see understanding PowerShell GIA, that's the exercise name, maps directly to the heading 1 right here. Okay. Then there are 2 properties, the introductory URI and the completion URI, which map to introduction content URL and completion URL.
And so we've got all this documented, right, for people to use.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't need to remember all this stuff.
No.
You can actually look at the documentation. It describes all the different properties, or you can put inside the Markdown file.
Yeah, I've got a template for this stuff which has all sorts of comments that tells you exactly what is contained in the Markdown file. Okay. Then there's introductory message, which maps to this piece right here. So here's the text that shows up inside of the introduction message, and the completion message as well. The text shows up right here. Okay. And I got a typo. That's probably just because of typing it quickly on my own side. So beyond your introductory message, and actually let me just check one thing really quick. I just want to see. Yeah, no, it's not. I was curious if it was actually maybe because of this, because that was incomplete.
All right, well, we'll continue on from there.
Yeah, that's fine. So, so you define your document as a collection of exercises with tasks inside of it. And so this is exercises have heading 1 with their properties inside of a heading 2. Tasks have heading 3 with their properties inside of heading 4. So if I look, I showed you the exercise properties mapping to what I was talking about inside the Markdown. And if I back up for a second and go to the first task, here I've got a task called sign in to SRV01. And if I flip over to here, I see that exact same text as heading 3. And
so I notice you got the double asterisk to indicate bold.
Yes, that's correct.
Right, and this is just all part of learning Markdown.
All part of learning Markdown. So Markdown uses 2 asterisks for bold. It uses, I think it's double underscore for italics. So there are some basic things for the most common stuff that you're going to use. Most people, I think, stick with headings, bold, and italics, and maybe doing some lists, like numbered lists and things like that. The formatting is very easy for Markdown. It's just a bit of a very small learning curve to get over. But the payoff is that you get offline editing in a format that in an editor, when it's working properly.
Yeah, it's a generic standard format that's recognized by any number of things.
Correct.
It's also worth noting there's a bunch of tools on the web too. You can make a Word document if you use like heading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in Word. And actually, it'll convert Word to Markdown. It does a pretty clean job.
Yes.
And if you've got embedded images, it'll even extract the images into a folder and a link within the Markdown to the images, right? So at the end of the day, there's a lot of ways to get to this native format of Markdown as a description of the content in the lab. You can go directly, you can export from LOD, you can go from Word, you can export from that, you can open an editor, you can type it directly in there. There's a lot of ways to get to this point, so.
Correct.
All right. So let's continue.
Yes, so there's this Markdown format which contains all of the information, and I mean, as you can see, it's quite a long document because this is a big lab. It's got text for screenshots, or not text, but it has screenshots properties. So here's the URI referencing a local file, and I showed you there was a screens folder. So the screens folder contains this 9A, 9BB screenshot. That's what's inserted in that point. Whether or not the screenshots show automatically, there's a property you can use to define that. Somebody asks specifically about type text. And so if I look for, what if I look for action? hang on a second. I've got a couple of them in here. I'll find one faster. PowerShell. So there's commands. So you can do PowerShell-based commands, or you can do type text commands. So we support this notion of well, all those different command types, right? You can do commands that run through command.exe, or that run in PowerShell.exe, that are visible or not.
This is this heading 4 with the calling keyword.
Correct.
Okay, and that's all in the documentation.
Yep, all in the documentation.
Question that came up: can you embed HTML descriptive stuff in here, or no?
Yes.
So
absolutely.
I can embed HTML as part of the Markdown.
Yeah, that's the beauty about Markdown too, right? Because Markdown converts to HTML, but it also supports inline HTML. So if Markdown has something that you want to, or if HTML is something you want to do that Markdown doesn't, you can just put HTML inside of the document. So
that answers your question right there.
Yes.
So, all right, so we've got this Markdown. How do we begin to integrate this with a lab?
Right. So I'm going to flip over to my browser. And so what you do is you export the content, and then you need to load it into a GitHub repository, because our integration point's actually with GitHub. So this is working with an existing lab, and I want to close that window.
So I can use Markdown with or without GitHub. Like I can actually use Markdown as my document editor. I can import export natively. But in a perfect world, you're going to store that document on GitHub.
Correct.
So that you don't need to import export. It happens automatically when you commit changes.
That's correct.
Cool. So let's take a look at that.
Sure. So when you're in GitHub, let's say you're working with a GitHub repository. I've got a sample one here. So
can you just zoom your screen a bit?
Yes.
There you go.
So Learn on Demand Systems, we have a GitHub repository. We have a GitHub organization with a bunch of repositories. And so one of those repositories is this IDL-MD sample. I should probably just rename that as GitHub sample. But at any rate, it is our IDL, so the Integrated Digital Lab Markdown lab, right? So it's a sample showing you what that content looks like. I talked about the export defining screens and videos, as well as this content.md file. This is exactly what that is.
So you could clone this and use it as a starting point.
Oh, you could, and then just copy paste modify.
That's the idea. This is a starting template that you can use.
Yes.
So you can find this repository, clone it into your own, and now you've got a point to work with if you just want to go from scratch.
Correct. I actually have two. I've got two repositories. One is sample, which is a lab complete with videos and screens and the whole content all in place. And I have another one that's called template, which doesn't contain any of that, but it contains comments inside of the Markdown that you can read as instructions to figure out what goes where and what are your options that are available. So you can work with both. If you look at this one, for example, this is that same, I've got a table of contents at the top, but this is that same file I was just showing you. So understanding PowerShell GIA. This is the rendered Markdown, right? This is how that was supposed to look inside of Visual Studio Code, which auto-updated recently for me, and so today it's not.
Yeah, so this is GitHub taking those Markdown tags and visualizing them the way an H1 tag in HTML is by making it big and bold.
Correct.
Okay.
So this is like, I was talking about it being a kind of a WYSIWYG format. This should have appeared, and Visual Studio Code just has a bug, so they'll fix it. I know the guys who work on it, so I can tell them.
You're so casual. I love it. It's just a bug. They'll fix it. Well, it's just a bug. Some guy right now is going, oh my God.
So, yeah, this format can appear side by side when you're working on Markdown, and it shows the full, this is like what you look at as a lab manual inside of our own Lab on Demand UI, where you have your heading for exercise, and then if I page down a little bit, then I get into my tasks. Here I can see the actions that are going to be taken. So in this case, sign into SRV01 is going to select the SRV01 VM. And then the next task, open PowerShell ISE, shows a screenshot, as well as has a command to actually launch PowerShell ISE. And so this is just a rendering of that Markdown format.
Right.
But it's pretty close to WYSIWYG.
When we will link this to LOD, it's actually going to take those additional properties like screenshots and commands and make them actionable items inside the platform. So you don't see these things like screenshot and command in LOD. They just become the live elements of the IDL. They become the screenshot that auto shows. They become the button you can click to run PowerShell. Yeah,
so let me fast forward directly to that and show you, because I have this is a sample, right? So I mean, I can just work with this sample. You can export your content from Lab on Demand. You get the zip file. The zip files, it's got a file structure already for you. You load that into a new GitHub repository, so you create a GitHub account, which, as I mentioned, can be free, right? Because if you're going to use public repositories, it's free. So you load your content into GitHub, and there are great resources, and I have some links in the slide at the end of this that talks about some of the resources to learn how to do that. And then once you get your content in GitHub and you're in a situation like this where I've got IDL MD sample and that's my lab and I want to link that back into Lab on Demand, I can go back to my Lab on Demand UI. I'm going to check in the file because I'm not working. You need to understand when you're going to work with Markdown or you're going to work in IDL Studio.
It's one or the other.
It's one or the other. It's either or. Because if you think about this as an integration point, right, we're pulling content from GitHub the moment that it changes. If you were to go and modify something inside of IDL Studio and then somebody was to make a change outside in GitHub, we would pull that in and overwrite it.
It's going to break things, yeah.
Right. So that's why it's one or the other. So all you got to do is go into Edit for your lab that you want to integrate with GitHub. You flip over to the Cloud tab, and this is where there's some new content. So Cloud now has GitHub integration. So after you've done your export and you have your content in GitHub, or maybe you created a new repo in GitHub and you're pulling content in for the first time into your lab, you need to configure your GitHub repository.
Now, I do want to mention, this is not live for the general world just yet. We're pushing this live into the production system very, very soon. You're on one of our test systems right now.
Yes.
So if you're going in looking for this, you're not going to find it. But it's going to magically appear here probably the next couple of days. So just keep an eye out for it.
That's right. So right off the bat, configuring GitHub repository tells me I can log into GitHub to get the content. And I want to actually zoom out for a second. Because right down at the bottom here, there's this yellow text that's important. So there's a warning. This warning is there because this lab has content. And so when I connect this to GitHub, that content is going to be blown away and overwritten.
So you make sure you export it first before you do a linking.
Yes, that's right. Because if you link to your empty repo and then think, okay, now I'll go and put my content there, you're going to be able to
overwritten your content. Yeah.
Right. So.
And it's worth noting, we do not have a way to restore that if you do it. We simply do not. It's done. If you do it, it's done. You're not getting it back. Another one of the reasons that this idea of integrating with GitHub is very, very appealing, because you have your own sense of version control for your content now. We don't got to worry about it.
Yes.
Whereas before, like, we can't, if you go in and screw up IDL, we can't revert it back to a previous version. GitHub, you can revert it back to a previous version. So there's a lot of things you gain by going down this path.
So the first thing you need to do is you need to log into GitHub. And when you're logging in, you're going to log in with your GitHub account that you created. And we're not going to store those credentials. We're just going to use your permissions to make a connection that basically you're giving us access to pull content from your repository once it's updated. So we don't store your username and password and reuse that information. We just make an initial connection point to set up basically a hook that we can pull content from.
Is this webhooks?
Yes.
Cool.
Yep. Oh, and it's asking me, GitHub supports two-factor authentication. And so I actually have to have that because there are certain repositories that require it. And so I contribute to some repositories that I cannot not have two-factor authentication turned on in my GitHub account. So
he's like a secret agent.
Actually, it's just because of I contribute to PowerShell open source.
007 of PowerShell.
So they require that. So there, I just use my authenticator to do that. So now that it's logging me into GitHub, and now it asks me to pick the repository where I want to pull content from. So I'm going to scroll down to, oh, I got to use my bigger window because I'm zoomed in, IDL MD sample. So if you're unsure of which repo, I mean, I've got a lot of them. When you're starting out, you're probably not going to have very many. You can actually click on this link, and it pops open the repository inside of your web browser, so you can take a look. But if you know the right one, you can just click on select and go directly to it. So I'll select that repository. The next step, it wants to know what's your content file. So we talked about Markdown. This is the Markdown MD file. So you can name it what you want. I generally try to use content, and in my template, you'll see it's content.md, but you can name your Markdown file.
Is it one repository per lab, or is it?
Yes.
Okay, so presently, I know we were talking at one stage about folders in repositories.
Yes, that's correct.
But at the moment, it's one repository per IDL.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, and it's one Markdown file that contains all the content as well, not multiple Markdown files. So I can click on the actual Markdown file if I want to look at it. So if I click on that, it pops it open, so I can go and see, is this my content I want? Yes, that's the content I want. So then I just click on select. Now it takes a second to go and make the connection. What this does is it goes into GitHub, it gets that content, it sets up my webhook, pulls that content in, and it says it sends an email notification to the repository owner. So it would send an email to me saying, hey, your configuration's all set up, and you've now got this linked to GitHub. So I can close this, and now when I go to, let me save this out. So now, actually, let me show this first. So you can see, once you're connected, it shows me which repository that I'm connected to. So IDL MD sample on my master branch shows me the content file I picked, and the last sync time is never because I just connected, and last sync status is none, and it's complete, and it's enabled. So you can disable it. You can also remove the GitHub integration if you want to at a certain point in time. I need to point out, if you remove the GitHub integration, it does not remove your content from Lab on Demand. So all it does is it severs the cord between you and GitHub.
Yeah, so at that point you'd have to clear it manually. There's a button in LOD to clear your content.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So I'm just going to save this. And now, don't bother with that. So now at this point, if I look at my lab manual is going to show me all that content that was updated from GitHub. Now in this case, it's the same. I overwrote it, right? Because I had pretty much the same content between the two. So I'm just going to show you something really quick. Actually, let me reopen that. So
now also notice, by the way, that the launching IDL Studio button's gone.
Yes.
So let's go back for a second. So yeah, there's no launch and edit it here. It's now GitHub. It's GitHub or nothing.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, it's not GitHub or nothing. It's GitHub or IDL, and you've chosen GitHub, so the IDL stuff's gone away.
Yes. So yeah, so if you look at this content, you can see here the first exercise says, in this exercise you will connect to existing blah, blah, blah. I'm going to go into GitHub for a second and go to that content, and I'm going to edit this file. Oh, reload. There, I'm logged in. I will edit my file, and it's just a text file, so you can edit it directly online if you want to. You don't even need an editor. And I'm just going to modify my, actually I'll make it higher up so I can see it better. Isn't GitHub great? Now,
that's such a predictable thing for you to type.
Of course. So I'm just making changes to a file, right? Because I'm just a content editor, and I'm working inside of my markdown. And so I make these changes, and I'm committing them to my GitHub repository. So I'm updating my content and added new text. You can put in comments, and the comments are useful because when you're dealing with history, you can get an idea of where to go if you want to roll back or look at something. So I'll commit those. Now, if I scroll down inside of GitHub right here, I can see, so this isn't GitHub great string, right? That's the one I just added. And if I go over here, you notice that this is that same text right here, the introductory text, and so it didn't contain that. However, if I refresh this window, now it does.
And so now if you were to launch that lab, which I know you can't because you don't have VMs associated, but if you were to launch that lab, on the side of the screen where the IDL steps are, it would now say that.
Yeah, I can still launch lab. It just doesn't show any content,
okay,
so it actually launches very quickly.
Let's see that.
So, oh, and it's worth noting that while we are integrating with GitHub and pulling changes in the moment that you make a commit, so here you can see right there, there's that text, isn't GitHub great? We pull changes in the moment that you make a commit. However, students who have that lab launched already are not impacted because they launched with the content that was available at that time.
Right.
So if there's a class going on, you're not going to hurt that class because the class has their content.
Well, let me clarify that. If a student has a lab already running, you're not going to hurt that session.
That's what I mean. Yes,
okay.
Sorry.
So
That's right.
if they're in a class and Bob has started the lab but Jane hasn't, and the commit happens in between that, well, Jane gets the new text and Bob has the old text.
Okay.
So there are considerations. Anytime you make changes, you got to think about these things. There's nothing new or nothing different. But the cool thing here is this is all being done in GitHub. No one's ever touched LOD.
Right.
So you're out there doing your version control, doing your changes, doing your commits, doing your testing. It's all done in GitHub. You commit it to GitHub, you walk away, and LOD just inherits that change.
Yes.
So cool.
Yes. So my point was more about, not about a whole class, but if you're an individual student who has a lab and you're working through it and you save it and you come back to it, you'll still get that same
Yeah, you're not
framework.
impacted by that change. The change is loaded at launch of the lab.
Yes. So that's how the integration works, and that's every time that you make any change, if you change a screenshot, if you have your video stored in GitHub and you change a video, those changes just get pulled in like magic and all of a sudden are available to people who would launch that lab. So now I can close out this, exit my lab. So that's the integration point. Now, what else? So if you're going to start going down this path, I already talked about exporting your content into, like when you export, you get a zip file. You take your zip file and you have that file structure and you load that into a GitHub repo. That gets your content from Lab on Demand into GitHub. If you're starting with a brand new lab, maybe you haven't even created your lab profile yet. Maybe you're just you have you know you need content, so you want somebody to go and create that content. What can they do? Well, if you go to, let me go back one level. Whoops. So if I go to Learn on Demand Systems, and I go to, well, there's the sample. So you could copy the sample, like Corey mentioned, and then just modify it. You could also copy this template. So if I click on IDL MD template, this contains, if you look at the file structure here, it contains a content MD file as well as screens and videos. Oh, sorry, there's a question. Does GitHub pull to LOD always take the master branch? Yes. Right now, we are always pulling from master. This is V1.
If you can think of a use case where we would need to have, choose the branch, I'm certainly open to hearing it. Email it to one of us or anyone or whatever, and we'd love to hear it because we're always looking at how we enhance it. This is actually version 2 of kind of our GitHub process because we did markdown as a supported import-export format first.
Correct.
That was a while ago, and so now we've got the integration with GitHub as the storage point, and so we're looking at things like, well, can we use lots of, can we use lots of labs in the same repository? Can we use folders in the same repository? Branches, for example. So, these are all things we're interested in hearing how you feel it would be useful.
That's right. So, in this particular template, I mentioned I had a template which had some comments to help you understand how this works. If you look at this template in the content MD file, if I click on it, it doesn't look like much, right? Because there's not much content in here. There's a lot of placeholders. But if I look at the raw view, which is the text file itself, you can see I'm using HTML comments, and I've got to-dos. And each of these to-dos describes what that section's about and what you can do with it so that you can then modify that section and add your own content. So there's a lot of to-dos in here that basically just walk you through. Exercise to-do number 1, replace first exercise in the heading above with the name of your new exercise. And so then you can do that and then remove that comment because you don't need the comment around anymore. Exercise number 2, if you have introductory videos, completion videos, that's where you put them. It tells you about that. If you don't, you can just remove those properties altogether, and so on. So 3, 4, 5, and then tasks, 1, 2, and I think I go up to 7 or 8 to-dos for tasks. And you can, talking about parity between this and IDL Studio, I've got in here support for warnings, knowledge, screenshots, videos, as well as command invocations. If you're going to do type text versus PowerShell, this tells you how to do those things inside of here. And so this documentation was all written by me. If there's questions you guys have about that, you can ask me. Whether you could push a question into our GitHub repository about it, and we'll see it. Or if you see a typo, you could do a pull request, like I mentioned earlier, and we'll see that as well. All those properties are available inside of here. And then at the bottom, because this is just one exercise with one task and a bunch of to-dos, if you want to add another task, it tells you to go and grab the task template from this location. And so there's templates for the individual tasks and individual exercises. And same thing for exercise. If you want to add another exercise, go and grab the template you want. And so those templates, there's 4 of them, 2 with comments and 2 without. Because if you do this enough, you're going to learn the format and not want all those comments to remove every time. So if you look at exercise MD, that is just plain Jane. Oh, sorry, I meant to do the no comment one. If you look at the no comment version, because the other one that has comments gives you all that detail to remove, the no comment one is just copy, paste, modify. Perfect.
Love it, love it.
Nice and clean.
Awesome. So that's pretty neat stuff, Kirk.
Thanks. I love this stuff. I mean, working with GitHub, and when you get into it, you get past the learning curve. It's a really great tool to use. And in terms of the learning curve, I'm going to flip back.
I can understand your infatuation with plain text files now.
There are great resources out there. I mean, GitHub's been around there for a while, right? coders have been using it, and Markdown coders have been using that for a while as well, and Microsoft's using this stuff for their documentation. And so there's just some learning to do around how that stuff works. So I've got some links here in the slide deck, and you can actually find all of this stuff as well. We have a lab guide that we're working on which contains these links specifically for GitHub. And we have, inside of our GitHub repositories, we have documentation that contains these links there as well. So talking about what is Markdown, there is a GitHub guide to learning Markdown on GitHub itself, and there's a hyperlink for that. There is a tutorial for Git. Now, I did not mention Git. Git is a tool that you use to do GitHub-like things on your local system. Because GitHub is a repository in the cloud, and I mentioned you can work with Markdown content offline. Well, if you're going to be still wanting to check in and track your changes and have history, you work with a local Git repository that then you synchronize with your cloud. And so that talks about that. I mean, GitHub is a very versatile tool because you could do all of your work. You could do all your editing inside of a web browser. Or you could do all of your editing using GitHub for Windows or GitHub for Mac. There are tools for that. Or you can work with Markdown tools. I mean, there's really a wide tool chain built around this. And so you got to find your comfort point where you want to work with this. And if you have questions about tools that are available as well, you can reach out and I can point you in the right direction based on what kind of things you're looking for. There is a free open source book for Git called ProGit. That's very comprehensive. One thing about these tools. What are you chuckling about? That's cute.
Hi, Brooklyn. Hi, Brooklyn. Hi. Get dressed for soccer, please.
Funny. So one of the things about these tools like Git and GitHub, there are a lot of things you can do with them. But when you're working with documentation, you only need to worry about 4 or 5 or 6. There's a very small set of things you really care about because GitHub was created for development, and so it's got all these fancy schmancy things that you might find really intimidating. But don't be intimidated. You can just look at working with it as a basic tool.
It really is as simple as you're editing a text file and you're putting a bunch of pound signs in front of things to give it meaning. It really is that simple. So we're certainly hoping that folks are going to begin to adopt this, take existing content, export it to Markdown, store it in GitHub repositories, and just kind of have a richer, more robust, better experience in just editing and maintaining that content through its life cycle. So reviewers, troubleshooting bugs, etc. You don't need to touch LOD to do all that. The people that are focused on the documentation and the content, they've got a place to work where they're just editing text files. Go in there and fix the text and save it and you're done. And there's no logging on and finding the lab and checking it out and all these steps that you ordinarily have to go through. Mm-hmm. So I think that's it, is it?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's those. I mean,
fantastic.
I'm glad you guys came to attend this. If you see somebody on a plane sometime typing away on a small keyboard with a little cell phone working on lab content, you can ask, hey, are you Kirk? Because I do that sort of thing.
There's a pretty good chance that's correct. Quick question, have you figured out a way to get around the 50 meg GitHub file size limitation, presumably for videos? The answer is no, but you can store the things wherever you want.
Yes.
We use Azure blobs for a lot of that stuff. We'll store big old files in Azure blobs. It's just a URL. If you store it on GitHub if you want, but it's just a URL. Put it wherever you want to point that URL to, and away you go. We've even done YouTube videos. You just take the embed link from YouTube, and they work great.
Yes.
So there's lots and lots of options.
Our integration is smart enough to realize when it looks at your Markdown file, if it sees an HTTP whatever address to Azure Media Blob or YouTube, it'll just link the content from there, not pull it in, and it'll treat it as a externally hosted video. Versus if it's referencing a local file that you have inside of GitHub, then it's going to pull that content in. And so you can decide, with videos and screenshots where you want to place them.
So that's our day. Appreciate everyone coming, and we'll see hopefully some of you guys back tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, first thing, we have our integrations with LTI, with edX, with our APIs, and then in this track, following that, performance-based testing, PBT. So thanks for coming. Have a good evening. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks.